Can you believe a young black teenager with no legal background managed to turn the tables on an experienced lawyer and a notoriously harsh judge? Stay with me until the end of this extraordinary journey to witness how a 17-year-old boy named Malik Thompson stood against the odds, fought for justice, and changed not only his life but also inspired an entire community. The courtroom buzzed faintly with whispers and the soft rustling of papers. Fluorescent lights bathed the room in a cold, clinical glow, their harsh glare bouncing off polished wooden benches and casting long, sharp shadows. Every seat was filled, every eye fixed on the center of the room, waiting. Sitting high above them all was Judge Nathaniel Hawthorne, a man known for his strict interpretations of the law and a legendary lack of leniency. His icy demeanor had made seasoned attorneys stumble. His decisions had set precedents others dared not challenge. His gaze was sharp, unblinking, and it swept across the courtroom like a cold wind. Then it stopped. The heavy wooden doors creaked open. Conversations fell silent. Everyone turned to see who was coming through. And there he was, Malik Thompson, 17 years old, black, wearing an oversized blazer that hung loosely on his narrow shoulders and carrying an old, battered briefcase that looked more like a hand-me-down from a thrift store than a lawyer's tool of trade. His sneakers squeaked against the polished floor as he walked with careful, deliberate steps toward the defense table. There was a murmur of confusion, then amusement. Snickers. Raised eyebrows. "Where's he going?" someone whispered. Judge Hawthorne arched a brow. His thin lips curved into something like a smirk. "This isn't a high school debate club, young man," he said, his tone razor-sharp. "You sure you're not lost? Maybe on your way to basketball practice." Laughter rippled through the courtroom. Franklin Prescott, the landlord's attorney, an older white man with silver hair and a perfectly tailored suit, chuckled as he shuffled his papers. His smirk said it all. This wasn't a competition. But Malik didn't falter. He paused for just a second, straightened his back, adjusted the blazer as best he could, and looked directly at Judge Hawthorne. "No, Your Honor," Malik said, his voice clear and steady. "I'm here to defend my mother." For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. But Malik Thompson hadn't always been this confident. To understand why he was standing here today, you had to go back to where this fight began. Malik lived with his mother, Denise Thompson, in an old neighborhood on the south side of the city. Time had forgotten their block. Cracked sidewalks, boarded-up windows, and streetlights that flickered more than they shined. Denise worked 2 cleaning jobs to keep a roof over their heads. Their house was small, and the paint peeled from the walls, but it was home, and she filled it with warmth. She had raised Malik alone since his father passed. "Every day," she told him, "you've got to be twice as good to get half as much. So work hard. Don't let them tell you who you are." Malik listened. He studied. He dreamed of college, of leaving the neighborhood behind one day. But one hot afternoon in June, Denise came home from her shift at the hospital and found a folded piece of paper stuffed into their door. An eviction notice. Her hands trembled as she opened it. "They're saying I owe back rent," she whispered, reading the words twice as if they might change. "But I paid. I know I paid." Malik took the letter from her. He read it. Again. Then again. His heart sank. "This doesn't make sense," he said, shaking his head. Denise sat down at the tiny kitchen table, her shoulders slumped. "People like us don't win, baby," she murmured. "They'll take everything from us if they want to. We don't get justice." But Malik wasn't ready to accept that. He clenched the eviction notice tightly, his jaws set. "Then I'll fight," he said quietly. "For you. For us." That night, Malik sat at the table, the eviction notice spread out beside his math homework. He Googled every word he didn't understand. Tenant rights. Eviction laws. Legal defenses. The screen blurred in front of him more than once as exhaustion crept in. But he pushed through. Days passed. He borrowed books from the library, old law textbooks with cracked spines. Printed off tenant laws from the local housing authority. Took notes in the margins. He hardly slept. Denise would wake up in the middle of the night and find him hunched over the table, eyes red but burning with focus. "Malik," she said one night, touching his shoulder gently. "You can't do this alone." "If I don't," he replied, "who will?" One evening, something caught his eye. In the fine print of the state tenant handbook, he read, "All eviction notices must be notarized by a certified notary public at the time of issuance to be legally enforceable." He grabbed their notice and stared at the signature at the bottom, Patricia Wilkes. Something didn't add up. After 2 hours of digging through online records, Malik found it. Patricia Wilkes had retired from notary service 2 years earlier. This wasn't just an error. This was fraud. Malik knew they had a shot. But it wouldn't be easy. The landlord had hired Franklin Prescott, one of the toughest eviction attorneys in the city. Malik had to be ready. He practiced arguments in front of a cracked mirror in their living room. He wrote out his opening statement over and over again until he could say it without blinking. Denise made him tea at night, watched him pace the kitchen, and when he stumbled over his words, she reminded him, "Take your time. Speak the truth." And finally, the day came. The courtroom was full. No one expected much from the skinny teenager in the borrowed blazer. Franklin Prescott didn't even bother hiding his smirk as Malik stood and addressed the judge. "Your Honor," Malik began, his voice clear. "I'm here to show that our eviction was illegal." Judge Hawthorne leaned forward slightly, intrigued despite himself. Prescott rose from his chair, strolling toward the center of the room. "Well, this is charming," he said, his tone patronizing. "A young man defending his mother. How noble. But the law doesn't work on feelings." "No," Malik replied. "It works on facts." He held up the eviction notice. "And this document is invalid. The notary who signed this retired 2 years before it was issued. That makes it fraudulent. And under state law, an eviction based on a fraudulent notice is void." Prescott's smirk faded. For the next hour, Malik presented his case. Calm, detailed. He referenced state statutes, cases he had memorized, and precedents that even made Judge Hawthorne nod in approval. When Prescott tried to rattle him, Malik stood his ground. Even if your mother owed rent, Prescott argued, procedural errors shouldn't protect her. Malik didn't flinch. The law requires due process. A fraudulent notice denies that. And the courts have ruled, Franklin versus Rhodes, 2011, that such errors invalidate the entire eviction. The room was silent. For once, Prescott had nothing to say. Judge Hawthorne called a recess to review the documents. When he returned, his expression had softened. He spoke directly to Malik. "You've presented an argument better than some trained lawyers I've seen in this courtroom," he said. "And you've reminded me what justice is supposed to be." He brought down his gavel. "This court finds in favor of the defendant. The eviction notice is invalid. The landlord is ordered to compensate the Thompsons for wrongful eviction and emotional distress." Denise cried. She stood and hugged her son tightly. "You did it," she whispered. "You really did it." "We did it," Malik replied. "Together." As they left the courtroom, Judge Hawthorne caught up with them. "Malik," he said, holding out his hand, "I owe you an apology. When you walked in, I didn't believe in you. But you proved me wrong." Malik shook his hand. "Thank you, Your Honor. If you ever consider law school," Hawthorne added, "come see me. I'd be honored to mentor you." Back home, Denise stood at their front door, looking around the house they had fought to keep. "You saved this," she said. "No," Malik replied. "We saved it." And as he stood on their front porch, Malik looked toward the future. "One day," he murmured, "I'll come back. Not as a defendant. As a lawyer." Denise smiled. "I believe it." This was only the beginning of Malik Thompson's journey. But for now, he had one. And justice, real justice, had finally found its way into their home.